Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're headed to Ethiopia. We're going to be uncovering the story of Saint Mariam of Zion.
It's a really fascinating story.
It is. Now, she's a figure very important in Ethiopian Orthodoxy, but her story, I think, is going to resonate with a lot of you out there.
I think so too. What I think is so amazing about her story is how it's connected to the Ark of the Covenant.
Okay, yeah, I've got to admit, I don't know much about that connection. I know the Ark is, of course, important in Judaism.
Right.
But how does Ethiopia come into play?
Well, Ethiopia is one of the first nations to actually adopt Christianity, before a lot of Europe even. So it has a really long history with the religion, and the Ark of the Covenant is central to that story.
Okay, so let me just back up for a sec, though. How did Ethiopia become such a center of Christianity in the first place? I mean, it seems pretty far removed from Rome and some of those other early hubs.
It does, but missionaries played a big part, and then the stories from the Bible got woven into the culture in Ethiopia.
Huh. So it wasn't just adopting a new religion, it was really like integrating those narratives into the existing culture.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting. So how does the Ark fit into all of this?
The journey of the Ark from Jerusalem to Axum in Ethiopia is really seen as a divine act. It solidified this belief that Ethiopia had a unique covenant with God.
I can see how that one event could have such a profound impact on a whole nation's faith and identity.
Yeah.
But what evidence do we have for this journey? Like, what did the sources actually say?
Well, the exact details are, debated. The belief in the Ark's presence in Ethiopia is a huge part of Ethiopian Orthodox tradition.
Okay, so regardless of whether we can prove for sure that it happened, it's clearly a very powerful belief for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. For centuries, it's been housed at the Church of Saint Mariam of Zion in Axum.
Which is a sacred site for many.
It is a very sacred site.
That makes me think, what would it be like to actually be in that church, surrounded by centuries of, belief and tradition around this artifact?
I think it would be incredibly powerful. I mean, just imagine being in the presence of something that's believed to have held the 10 Commandments.
Wow, yeah, they're kidding. Okay, that is going on my travel bucket list for sure.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about the Ark, but where does Saint Mariam fit into all of this?
She is very much connected to the Ark. She's often shown as its guardian, a symbol of how important and sacred it is.
So she's more than just a saint. She's like a representation of the Ark itself and its importance to Ethiopian Orthodoxy.
Right.
But what about the average believer? What does Saint Mariam represent for them on a personal level?
Well, she's kind of like this bridge between the divine and the human.
Okay.
She's seen as someone who can intercede, plead with God for the faithful. She's an advocate.
Someone in your corner.
Exactly.
I like that. That actually makes her role a lot more relatable, even for someone who isn't part of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition.
Yeah, I think so too. It's interesting when you start looking at all these different faiths and traditions, you see how they connect with those universal human desires. Wanting connection, meaning hope.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Uh-huh.
Now, our sources also mention this figure named Menelik I, son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. How does he fit into this whole story?
He is central to the legend of the Ark's arrival. He brought the Ark from Jerusalem to Axum.
Okay, so he's the one that actually brought it over.
He is, and it ties Ethiopia to the biblical world, which is really important for their identity as a nation.
So it's like a historical puzzle.
Yeah.
And with every piece we uncover, another layer of the story is revealed. But it also places Ethiopia as this distinct center of Christianity.
Yes.
Separate from the Roman or Byzantine centers we typically think of when we talk about early Christianity.
It's a really fascinating aspect of the story. It sets Ethiopia apart.
It does. And that's what I love about these deep dives. We uncover these layers of history and belief and cultural significance that most of us would never know about otherwise. But how much of this story is actually based on historical fact? How much of it is legend and tradition?
That is a great question, and it's a tough one to answer. I mean, separating fact from legend after so many centuries is always a challenge. But what's important to remember is how powerful these narratives are and how they've shaped Ethiopia's identity and their faith.
So even if we can't definitively prove every detail, the impact is undeniable.
Exactly. And, this brings us to another fascinating aspect of Ethiopian Orthodoxy, the role of women.
Oh, that's right. Our sources mention that women play a central role in this tradition.
Yeah.
Supporting the church and nurturing the faith.
Yes, and Saint Mariam isn't just this, lone figure. She represents a long tradition of honoring women within the church.
And that is a really crucial point, because we so often hear about these very male-dominated hierarchies, it sounds like Ethiopia has a different story to tell.
It does. Ethiopian Orthodoxy recognizes the importance of women to the faith. They're not just sitting on the sidelines.
They're active participants.
Yes, very much so.
That's fascinating. I really want to learn more about the specific roles women play in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church.
Well, we'll definitely delve into that when we come back, but for now, I want you to think about this. How does this story, the story of Saint Mariam and the Ark of the Covenant, how does it challenge what you thought you knew about the origins of Christianity and how diverse it really is?
That is a fantastic question, and we'll be right back to discuss it and explore more about Saint Mariam of Zion and this rich tradition of Ethiopian Orthodoxy.
And we are back. I've got to say, I am just hooked on the story of Saint Mariam and the Ark of the Covenant. It's really amazing how one, artifact can have such a huge impact on a whole nation's identity.
It is, yeah. It speaks to how powerful symbols and stories can be.
It does, it does. You mentioned before the break that we talk more about the role of women in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church.
I am really curious about that. We hear so much about male-dominated religious hierarchies, and it sounds like Ethiopia might have a different story.
They do. Women are super important in keeping the faith alive.
So what do they actually, do?
Well, first of all, they maintain the traditions and rituals. They're the ones preparing for the feasts. They're ones teaching kids about the scriptures. They support people in need.
Those everyday things that really hold a community together.
Exactly. And there's also a long tradition of female monasticism.
Oh, wow. Okay.
These women dedicate their lives to prayer, to spiritual pursuits.
So they have a lot of influence.
They do. They really do. They've helped preserve religious texts, educate clergy. They even shape theological discussions.
It sounds like they have more autonomy and influence than we see in some other religions.
It's a very unique situation. And the church also recognizes their spiritual authority formally.
What do you mean?
Well, they can serve as deaconesses, assist priests during services, and, provide pastoral care to the community.
So it's not just informal behind-the-scenes stuff. They hold actual positions.
They do.
Interesting. Okay, so they have a pretty big impact on the church.
Oh, yeah. And this respect extends beyond just, official positions, too. Motherhood is very important. The spiritual power of women in the family is really emphasized.
So they're kind of seen as these pillars of the faith in all aspects of life.
Yes. And this brings us back to Saint Mariam. She represents this broader respect for feminine spirituality in Ethiopian Orthodoxy.
It's more than just about her as an individual. It's about recognizing the feminine as a fundamental part of their faith.
Exactly.
How is that reverence for Saint Mariam, for women in general? How's it expressed?
One way is through feasts and celebrations dedicated to Saint Mariam. They bring people together, they celebrate their shared faith.
You mentioned these celebrations earlier with processions and things.
Yes.
I'd love to hear more about those. What's it actually like to be there?
Imagine thousands of people dressed in their finest clothes, filling the streets of Axum. The air is thick with incense, you can hear chanting, and there are colorful banners everywhere.
Wow, that's a very powerful image. It's like being transported back in time to witness this, ancient tradition.
And as the procession moves through the streets, the energy is contagious. People sing hymns, they dance, they share stories about Saint Mariam and her miracles.
So it's not a somber religious thing, it's a real celebration.
It is. And it helps pass down the stories and values to younger generations. The values of humility, devotion, service.
Right. Keeping the traditions alive.
Right.
But how do these traditions resonate with younger people today? The ones growing up with so many different influences.
That's a question a lot of religions are facing these days. But Ethiopian Orthodoxy is really good at adapting.
Holding on to those core values, but also evolving with the times.
Exactly. And you see it in how younger people engage with their faith. They use social media to share St. Mariam's story. They create modern music inspired by traditional hymns, even connect the values to social justice movements.
So they're finding ways to keep your faith relevant.
Yes. And that brings us to a really important point. The story of Saint Mariam and the Ark of the Covenant really challenges this narrow view of what early Christianity looked like.
We tend to focus on Rome and the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah.
But here's this vibrant tradition thriving in Ethiopia.
Right, and it reminds us that Christianity isn't this one, block. It's incredibly diverse.
It's shaped by different cultures and languages and historical experiences.
Exactly. But before we get into that too much, I want to leave you with this question. How does the story of Saint Mariam, the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, How does it challenge what you thought you knew about faith and its global nature?
And we are back. You know that question we left you with before the break about how diverse Christianity really is? Something I've been thinking about a lot.
It's easy to forget, isn't it? We tend to have this very specific image in mind when we think about early Christianity.
We do. But the story of Saint Mariam, the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, it just shows how much more there is to discover.
It really does, and it challenges us to, broaden our perspective, to see how much richer and more complex Christianity is than we might realize.
Yeah, and for me, one of the things that really stood out in this whole discussion was the importance of community. It wasn't just about believing certain things as an individual, it was about celebrating together, sharing stories, and really supporting one another.
You picked up on something really important there. It's woven into all those rituals and celebrations we talked about earlier. Those processions, the prayers, even the communal meals. They all strengthen those bonds and make people feel like they belong.
It's like those traditions are what hold the community together, help them pass down their identity to future generations.
Exactly. And that sense of community, it provides a kind of safety net. Especially when people are facing tough times, it's that feeling that they're not alone in their struggles.
I like that, a safety net. That's a good way to put it. I also wanted to ask you a little more about storytelling. It seems like a really important part of Ethiopian Orthodoxy. We've obviously been talking about the narrative of the Ark and Saint Mariam. But what other kinds of stories are important?
Storytelling is essential to the tradition. It's how they teach moral lessons, inspire devotion, and keep people connected to their spiritual heritage. They've got stories about the saints, stories from the Bible, even local legends.
It sounds like it's all connected, right? Like each story is a thread that makes up this bigger tapestry of their beliefs and their practices.
That's a great way to think about it, and it's not just about passively listening. They believe that they're part of this ongoing narrative, adding their own experiences and interpretations to the mix.
Everyone has a role to play in shaping the story.
Exactly. But it does make you wonder, how do these ancient stories speak to people today, especially young people who are growing up in a world that's so different?
Right. How do you keep traditions like this alive?
It's a challenge for sure, but one of the things that's impressive about Ethiopian Orthodoxy is how it adapts and finds ways to stay relevant. They're not afraid to evolve.
But without losing those core values.
Exactly. And you see that in the ways that younger people engage with their faith. They use social media to share stories about Saint Mariam. They make music inspired by the old hymns. They even find connections to modern issues like social justice.
So they're finding ways to make their faith work for them in the modern world.
That's the key, isn't it? And I think that's a big takeaway from the story of Saint Mariam and the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition.
What is?
That faith isn't static. It's not about clinging to the past. It's a journey.
And it can take you to some really unexpected places.
Yeah.
Challenge what you thought you knew and help you grow.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap things up today, I want to leave you with one final thought. What can we all learn from the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition about the power of community, about how important storytelling is, and about how faith can endure for centuries and still have meaning for people today?
Let the story of Saint Mariam and the Ark of the Covenant be a reminder that our search for meaning, for connection, it's something that transcends time and place. It's a journey we're all on together.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.